Link TV, connecting you to the world. Link TV is viewer supported. Watch more at linktv.org.
Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Libya's revolutionaries seize airport in besieged Misurata. Syrian forces kill 5 anti-regime protesters in Homs. And Yemeni cities continue civil disobedience campaign. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
Libyan revolutionaries said that they have taken control of Misurata airport, which they were besieging. They also achieved victories over Gaddafi's battalions 40 kilometers west of Ajdabiya city.
They are also besieging other battalions north of Jahra city in the Al-Wahat region of eastern Libya.
The revolutionaries also said they controlled the Souk Tawanza neighborhood in Misurata. They are besieging Gaddafi's battalions at the War Institute in the southern parts of the city.
Internationally, the UN Secretary General called for an immediate ceasefire in Misurata, as well as other Libyan cities.
For its part, NATO said that it started the second phase of its operations in Libya by targeting command and control centers, but not targeting people, including Colonel Muammar al-Gaddafi.
The Libyan revolution enters another day as the situation on the ground witnesses some development. In the besieged western Libyan city of Misurata, revolutionaries managed to achieve progress by taking full control of the Souk al-Arabi neighborhood. They also seized equipment left over from their battles with Gaddafi's battalions. However, they in turn have lost a number of revolutionaries who were either killed or wounded. In the west, specifically in the capital Tripoli, tanks were heavily deployed in the Bab al-Azaziyah region, while the revolutionaries carried out operations in other areas. In the eastern parts of the country, revolutionaries managed to destroy a number of the battalion's military vehicles in the Arba'in area, west of Ajdabiya. Meanwhile, NATO warplanes continued their airstrikes on the battalions deployed around the region. In Jalu, the battalions did not succeed in storming the city after violent confrontations with the revolutionaries. NATO said that it began the second phase of its military campaign over Libya by targeting command and control centers without targeting people, including Colonel Gaddafi. This comes as the European Union announced that it is proceeding to open a bureau in Benghazi to help the revolutionaries with security and social issues. In Doha, the Libyan Tribes Forum concluded its conference by demanding the international community arm the revolutionaries in the face of Gaddafi's battalions.
قال ناشطون سوريون أن ما لا يقل عن 5 أشخاص قتلوا خلال العملية.
Syrian activists said at least 5 people were killed in a military operation carried out by Syrian military and security forces in the Baba Amro neighborhood of Homs, Syria's third largest city. This comes as the Syrian government announced the formation of a committee to draft a new general election law within 2 weeks.
أن يتم إنجاز هذا القانون خلال أسبوعين.
Tanks were used once again in the confrontations with the popular protests. Their latest moves were in the Baba Amro neighborhood of Homs, which was shaken by the sound of explosions. Reports from the city said that the security institutions launched an arrest campaign on residents and activists.
The curfew is effective, and we have unconfirmed reports from the Baba Amro neighborhood and its surrounding areas. The police in the 13 villages have been combing the area and arresting people for days.
إلا أن مصدرا عسكريا سوريا مسؤولا أكد أن الجيش والقوى الأمنية تتابع ملاحقة.
But an official Syrian military source asserted that the military and security forces are trying to capture what he referred to as the remainder of armed terrorist groups in Baba Amro and in Dara'a's countryside. Syrian state TV aired scenes of Daraa, indicating that life has returned to normal in the city. Activists say that the city of Jassim in Horan province was also subjected to an attack after opposition figures organized a demonstration on Monday night and Tuesday. These unconfirmed images, taken by an independent source, show that Syrian soldiers were deployed in the city's streets, and that snipers were seen on the rooftops of houses and buildings. Amateur videos uploaded online confirmed the presence of tanks in a number of Syrian cities and towns. These armored vehicles are driving down alleys in the town of Da'al in southern Syria. Opposition figures believe that the Syrian army's direct interference in the events is the result of a decision by the Syrian government to offer no fundamental concessions. They refer to statements made by Rami Makhlouf, President Bashar al-Assad's cousin and Syrian entrepreneur, who asserted to the New York Times that the regime will fight until the end. He warned that there will be no stability for Israel if there is no stability in Syria. Some opposition figures believe that the dialogue that the Syrian president's advisor Butayn Sha'aban spoke of contained no essential information or official position on the matter, even though they confirmed that the meeting did take place.
فلا يرى فيه بعض المعارضين جوهر الموقف الرسمي وإن أكدوا حصول مثل هذا اللقاء.
فقط بثلاثة أسماء من يعني معارضين مستقلين.
They met with 3 independent opposition figures. I think this was a political maneuver by the regime to expand its options. It's trying to alienate the opposition on the one hand and test the possibility of a path towards dialogue on the other.
يعني لتجريب احتمال أن يلزم هذا المسار الجانبي في وقت من الأوقات.
وبالتوازي مع إجراءات الحل الأمني والعسكري.
While taking security and military measures against protests, the Syrian government is also trying to send positive signals of its intentions for reform. Adding to the list of consecutive promises the regime has made in the last several weeks, the government issued a decision to form a committee tasked with preparing a new draft law for general elections compatible with the highest international standards. Wa'el Hajar, BBC.
Every Sunday, worshippers visit this Roman Catholic cathedral in the old town of Damascus. Christianity is one of the 12 religious sects in Syria. The country has been witnessing a wave of protests since March 15th, which has been repressed by the regime. This priest's sermon is not devoid of these events.
We pray for God's protection of our president in these times of trials and tribulations.
The Syrian president is very popular with the country's Christians, and their position on the events is crystal clear. Most of them oppose the idea of toppling the current secular regime that they view positively. The regime, for its part, accuses Salafi extremist groups of using this popular movement for their own goals. The Christians still believe that their relationship with the Alawites, who have been ruling the country for 40 years, will remain as strong as their relationship with all Muslims.
In the past, before the current regime, Sunnis always ruled. People were never scared. Schools, churches, and mosques have existed for a long time.
Christians in Syria believe they can rely on the ruling regime regardless of the situation. A small number of them fear that Christians will mass emigrate from Syria or that they'll be subjected to violence if the regime falls, similar to Iraqi Christians who emigrated to escape the violence.
It is completely unacceptable for the Christians to leave the country. Those who target the Christians are also targeting the Alawites, Sunnis, and Druze. If a Sunni is targeted, we will all defend him. And if a Christian is targeted, everyone will defend him.
Christians account for 7.5% of Syria's population of 22 million and enjoy the freedom to worship. However, they are frequently concerned, especially after protesters tried to gain the support of the Christians.
Our Al-Alam correspondent in Sana'a reported that security forces shot at dozens of demonstrators in an attempt to prevent their march to the cabinet building. Leaders of the protest movement in Yemen called for a peace crawl to government institutions as part of a general civil disobedience campaign intended to rush the downfall of the regime.
Another step was implemented by Yemenis in their journey to attain their popular demands, most important of which are the toppling and prosecution of Saleh's regime. The civil disobedience campaign that was called for by the youth of the revolution was witnessed in Aden and parts of Lahj and Abyan. where commercial stores were shut down and government offices disrupted. Yemenis are determined to continue the campaign every Saturday and Wednesday. Demonstrations also took place across Yemeni provinces and cities. Those in the city of Taz grew in size following the martyrdom and injury of a number of people marching toward government offices. This led thousands to take to the streets of Taz and gather in front of institutions, including the state oil company, whose main entrance was closed by demonstrators. Within the same mobilization, women marched in the city of Crater. The women's protest headed to Hurriya or Freedom Square while chanting the same popular demands.
We have one demand, which is the downfall of the regime. God willing, Ali Abdullah Saleh will be toppled.
The movements for change in Aden are united. We're here because of what happened in Taiz.
The protest was held at the same time as an exhibit for the revolution's martyrs. Since January, nearly 160 people have been killed. And while acts of violence and killings are still being exercised against the Yemeni people, the Persian Gulf Cooperation Council still insists on marketing its initiative to solve the crisis. An initiative that seems removed from the demands of the street.
From the beginning, the squares refused to consider initiatives that deal with the situation as a political crisis. So protests continue, especially in light of the latest escalation.
The youth of the revolution have taken consecutive steps in the past few months, moving from demonstrations and marches to sit-ins, in their resolve to reject the initiatives. And if Saleh's days in power don't end soon, Yemenis are planning to take their largest step yet, represented by a crawl toward government institutions, including the presidential palace.
Human Rights Watch has slammed Bahrain's trial of civilians in military courts. The US-based rights group has called on the ruling Al Khalifa family to put an end to civilian prosecutions in military courts. Human Rights Watch has also said that there are detained activists that have signs of ill treatment and even perhaps torture. It's now calling on the Bahraini regime to set up an independent commission to look into allegations of torture against anti-government protesters. Meanwhile, authorities have fired nearly 300 employees from the Persian Gulf Sheikh Dams Petroleum Company for taking part in anti-regime protests. Many doctors and nurses have been arrested from hospitals for providing medical services for injured protesters. The Saudi-backed Bahraini regime has stepped up its crackdown on dissent in recent weeks. Over 1,000 people, including activists, have been arrested. Reports say that over a dozen people were arrested in a single night across Bahrain. In the town of Hamad, 6 people were arrested, including 3 college students.
Pakistani police say unidentified attackers have thrown 2 hand grenades at Saudi Arabia's consulate in Karachi. Authorities say 2 motorcyclists threw the grenades and fled the scene. They say the attack is a possible reaction to the U.S. killing of Osama bin Laden. One of the grenades landed inside the compound, leaving no damage or casualties. No group has claimed responsibility for the attack. Saudi Arabia has been under criticism for intervention in the internal affairs of regional countries, including Bahrain.
Pakistan's main opposition party has demanded an independent inquiry into the controversy surrounding the death of Osama bin Laden. Our correspondent has the detail from Islamabad.
This pro-military rally, apparently urged by the government, was aimed at easing the pressure over the controversy surrounding the death of Osama bin Laden. But the mood was different here at the meeting of the country's main opposition party, which was discussing the fallout of the Abbottabad operation which killed bin Laden. The Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz argued that the US raid deep inside Pakistan to kill Al-Qaeda leader is an issue that requires thorough investigation. At the news conference, former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif demanded an independent inquiry into the matter.
It is proposed that a judicial commission be appointed within 3 days, comprising the Chief Justice of Pakistan as President, the 4 Chief Justices of the High Courts, to ascertain the full facts regarding the presence of Osama bin Laden in Pakistan and the US operation on the night of 2nd May 2011. to determine the nature and causes of failures of the civil and military authorities in dealing with matters relating thereto.
The Pakistani public have been outraged at the perceived impunity of the US raid. Sharif, who enjoys wide popularity, also raised questions about the competence of the military when it comes to matters of intelligence. But the country's Prime Minister has defended the military, dismissing allegations that they colluded with Al-Qaeda and saying intelligence failure is not limited only to Pakistan. The government has already set up an inquiry commission to look into the US raid in Abbottabad city. But experts say the government-backed commission cannot satisfy the critics.
Just creating a commission from the government side won't serve the purpose. Government is trying to cope up with the challenges which they are facing after this incident, but that would not be possible if the opposition would not be on board.
The government, in an effort to pacify the growing anger, has called for a joint session at Parliament on Friday, where the top military and intelligence officials will brief the lawmakers on the Abbottabad operation. The country's main opposition party has rejected the inquiry under the supervision of a serving military general, saying the Abbottabad operation has deeply hurt the people of Pakistan. It remains to be seen how the government will respond to the demand by the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, which seeks a judicial probe to investigate the Bin Laden debacle. Kamran Yusuf, Press TV, Islamabad.
The Palestinians who were deported after the Israeli siege on the Nativity Church have staged a sit-in at the UN headquarters, marking the 10th anniversary of their expulsion from the West Bank to the Gaza Strip. The protest was attended by supporters from various Palestinian factions. The deportees appealed to the UN commissioner in the Gaza Strip to help end their ordeal. This is the first sit-in since the signing of the reconciliation deal. The participants said that the protest was aimed at drawing Palestinian and international attention to their plight, which has been forgotten for years due to the division. Our correspondent, Bassam al-Madhoun, reports from Gaza.
The 9 years of expulsion have not killed their hope of returning to their homes one day. They highlighted their plight by staging yearly sit-ins at the UN headquarters in a bid to mount pressure on Israel to help end their suffering. They are the deportees held captive in the Gaza Strip.
As we stand here in front of the UN headquarters, we would like to send a message to the entire world. As deportees, we are victims of a war crime. We were expelled from the Church of the Nativity 9 years ago. They are committing crimes against our families in Bethlehem by preventing them from visiting us in Gaza.
The reconciliation agreement has reopened the cases of 29 Palestinian deportees. They are among the 39 deportees who were expelled from the Nativity Church to Gaza. Their plight will likely top the upcoming National Unity government's agenda in an attempt to find a solution to their problem.
The internal division is to blame for the slow progress on this issue. We hope that this reconciliation deal will lead to the formation of a joint Palestinian action front to help close this file as well as others.
The deportees are demanding justice from the occupation, which continues to expel them and their loved ones from the cities. Jawad Ahmad Obiyat is one of the Nativity Church deportees. His father passed away a few months ago, and Jawad was unable to see him. Meanwhile, his mother continues to wait for him. He misses her morning bread the most.
My father passed away. My mother told me that my father's only regret was not being able to see me, my wife, and our daughter. He passed away before I could see him. My biggest fear is that my mother will pass away without being able to see her.
Baby Malik didn't choose to grow up far from the narrow alleys of Bethlehem. It was Israel that separated her from her grandmother. She is destined to grow up in this large open-space prison called Gaza.
They filmed Malak, waving goodbye to you.
Israel's Day of Independence has been celebrated, the Palestinian version of events, referred to as the Nakba Day of Catastrophe, is just ahead. The Israeli defense establishment is preparing for the outbreak of violence this weekend as Palestinians mark the creation of the Jewish state as a disastrous development. The annual Nakba Day activities will be marked on May 15th, the date of Israel's founding according to the Western calendar. The IDF is planning to boost deployment throughout Judea and Samaria in preparation for all potential scenarios, including extreme clashes. Police are also preparing for the possibility that Israeli Arabs may stage demonstrations within the Green Line. Several Nakba Day protests were held in Arab villages in the western Galilee and the Negev yesterday, and more protests are expected in the coming days. The Palestinians are calling for civil disobedience throughout the West Bank and in Arab countries surrounding Israel. A Facebook page is now urging Palestinians to launch a third uprising or intifada against Israel beginning this Sunday. How serious are the calls for a third Palestinian uprising? IBA's Ali Wogelenter spoke with Dr. Jonathan Spire of the Gloria Research and International Affairs Center and Dr. Gershom Baskin, the co-director and founder of the Israel-Palestine Center for Research and Information, and asked what Israel can expect this coming Sunday.
First of all, we're seeing that the Israeli security forces are certainly beefing up their presence in the relevant areas, expecting this possibility of trouble. Yes, there was the Facebook group. Having said that, there's of course a lot of political action going on right now on the Palestinian side. They are in the midst of negotiations for a new unity government, some very sensitive issues to be ironed out. So I'm not quite sure if there would really be a desire at this time to sort of light a fire with regard to clashes with Israel. My own sense, I mean, has to be careful with these kind of predictions at least, but my own sense is that May 15th could turn out to be perhaps a little bit less than what some of the more excitable organisers on Facebook have been hoping for over the last months.
Do you think the word has come down from on top, down to the street, no violence, don't start a fire, we can't afford it right now?
Yeah, I think there's a sense in which that would be the case. I mean, there just isn't an interest right now, you know, with the height of negotiations, sensitive negotiations between Fatah and Hamas, to launch into the great unknown of a new intifada. Having said that, of course, there are organisers and there are activists who are outside of the realms of Fatah and Hamas, and it's these people who've been attempting to put together some of the protests planned for May 15th. My own sense is that, at least in the past months, these kind of calls have turned out to be something less on the Palestinian street than one might have thought they would be and what their organisers would hope they would be, and I suspect that may well be the case also on May 15th.
So far from what I'm hearing from the ground, the grassroots inside Palestine is not very much. If we recall back to the year 2000, on May 15th, they had hundreds of thousands of Palestinians take to the streets in marches that were organized by Fatah. This year, there are attempts by the grassroots movements inspired by Egypt and Tunisia and Libya and other places to try and get something off the ground. The March 15th movement, as it was called, that set up protest in Manara Square in Ramallah, and in the Nativity Square in Bethlehem, was not supported by the masses. People didn't come out in large protests. Their main call was for Palestinian unity. The fight against the occupation was not the #1 issue on their agenda, and they pretty much feel that they've achieved their goals by bringing about this unity agreement, even though they really had nothing to do with it.
مساء الخير. سجلات هذا المساء يتابع فتح ملف مقتل أسامة بن لادن.
Sajalat discusses Osama bin Laden's killing in an attempt to explore its impact on the jihadist movement around the world. Welcome, Hani Al-Savai, director of the Makrizi Center for Historical Studies. Many experts and observers believe that Al-Qaeda went from being a centralized organization where orders were sent from a command center to multiple organizations acting as franchises for the Al-Qaeda brand, influenced by a certain atmosphere.
تنظيمات تتولى فرانشايز القاعدة اسم القاعدة وتتأثر بجو معين.
Is it currently functioning this way?
Of course it is.
Meaning Osama bin Laden's killing will not lead to the collapse of the rest of the organization unless they truly function in a centralized fashion that we're not aware of.
The Qaeda organization is not a Facebook group or an organization of people united by an immediate and temporary cause. The organization is essentially based on faith and ideology. He went out for either victory or martyrdom. He was the one who united all of them. This idea brought together the Uzbeks, Egyptians, Saudis, Algerians, Moroccans, Tunisians, and Mauritanians. So Sheikh Osama set up building blocks and planted the first seeds years ago when he was a young man in Afghanistan.
كان في الجهاد الأفغاني. الشيخ أسامة الآن حتى هو والدكتور أيمن.
The role of Sheikh Osama and Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri is over. They fulfilled their duties. The organization does not depend on the old command center or the old elite.
In theory, since the old centralized leadership is over, the organization will not be paralyzed by the killing of its leader. Of course, there is no operational leader since it is decentralized.
هذا التنظيم يؤمن بالآتي. هذا التنظيم أو أي مسلم يؤمن بالآتي.
And this organization, or any Muslim, believes the following. If these groups are expected to die with the deaths of their leaders, then Islam would have to die with the death of its messenger. May the blessings and the peace of God be upon him.
It's true that Islam will not end with the death of Osama bin Laden, but Al-Qaeda might.
It could, but witnesses are on the ground. Islam has a broad front. This organization is not a state, nor does it say that it represents Islam. Al-Qaeda resembles a military group calling for the liberation of the countries of the Muslims. Sheikh Osama said, "Let Muslim scholars agree on a specific vision and meet for the sake of the Ummah's victory." He called for the liberation of the Muslims' countries. He does not claim that he is Islam or that he represents Islam.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs which connect you to the world.